Times change, laws change, and what was perfectly normal yesterday can get you arrested today. Australia wasn't always the safety-conscious, regulated country it is now. There was a time when things that would horrify us today were just part of everyday life, legal, accepted, and completely unremarkable. Today, we're looking at 10 things that used to be legal in Australia and would now land you in jail. Not because people were reckless, but because the world was different and we didn't know what we didn't know. Let's look at what used to be perfectly fine. Number 1, hitting your own kids. And here's the big one, the thing that was legal, accepted, and widely practiced for generations. Physically disciplining your own children. A smack on the bottom, a slap on the hand, a whack on the legs with a wooden spoon, these were standard parenting tools. Parents had the legal right to use reasonable force to discipline their kids, and what counted as reasonable was pretty broad. It wasn't about cruelty, it was about correction. Kids knew that if they stepped out of line, they'd feel it. And for the most part, society backed parents up. Teachers, neighbours, relatives, everyone agreed that a bit of physical discipline was necessary and normal, but the laws have changed. While smacking isn't completely illegal in Australia yet, the definition of acceptable force has narrowed significantly. What was once considered normal discipline can now be investigated as abuse, and parents have been charged and convicted for actions that would have been unremarkable 50 years ago. The cultural shift has been enormous, and opinions are deeply divided. But the fact remains, what your grandparents did without a second thought could now see you in front of a magistrate. Number 2, selling alcohol to kids. Believe it or not, there was a time when kids could be sent to the pub to pick up beer for their parents. You'd walk up to the bar with a note from mum or dad and a handful of coins, and the publican would hand over a bottle or a flagon without question. It wasn't about encouraging underage drinking, it was about trust, community, and a different attitude toward alcohol. Kids weren't expected to drink it themselves, they were just the messengers. In rural areas especially, this was completely normal. The local pub knew every family in town, and if young Billy showed up with a note, they'd fill the order and send him on his way. Laws around selling alcohol to minors tightened significantly from the 1,970 seconds onward, and today, selling alcohol to anyone under 18 is a serious offence with heavy penalties. The cultural attitude has shifted entirely, and the idea of a child walking into a pub to buy beer seems almost absurd now. But for decades, it was just another errand, like picking up bread or milk. Number 3, keeping native animals as pets. In the early to mid-20th century, it wasn't unusual for Australian families to keep native animals as pets. A kangaroo in the backyard, a koala in a tree, a kookaburra in a cage, even the occasional wombat or possum. People found joeys or injured animals, brought them home, and raised them. There were no permits, no regulations, and no one telling you it was wrong. Native animals were part of the landscape, and keeping one felt natural. It was only as conservation awareness grew and we began to understand the impact of removing animals from the wild that laws changed. Now, keeping a native animal without a proper license is illegal across Australia, with heavy fines and even jail time for repeat offenders or wildlife trafficking. The laws exist to protect the animals and their ecosystems, and they're strictly enforced. But there was a time when having a pet kangaroo was just something some families did, and nobody thought it was a problem. Number 4, corporal punishment in schools. If you went to school in Australia before the 1,980 seconds, you knew the strap or the cane. Teachers had the legal right to physically punish students, and they used it. A whack across the hand with a leather strap, a few strikes with a cane across the backside or the palm, it was standard discipline for misbehaviour. You didn't tell your parents because they'd likely give you another one for getting in trouble in the first place. It wasn't abuse, it was just how discipline worked. The strap hung in the classroom or the principal's office, a constant reminder to behave. Corporal punishment was gradually phased out across Australian schools during the 1,980 980 seconds and 90 seconds, with each state banning it at different times. Now, a teacher laying a hand on a student in anger or punishment would face immediate dismissal and likely criminal charges. The cultural shift has been complete. But for generations of Australian kids, the strap was a fact of school life, and the memory of that leather hitting your palm stays with you forever. Number 5. Smoking absolutely everywhere. There was a time when you could smoke anywhere, in restaurants, on planes, in hospitals, in offices, even in cinemas. Ashtrays were on every table, in every waiting room, on every desk. Smoking wasn't just accepted, it was expected. Doctors smoked in their surgeries, teachers smoked in staff rooms, and nobody complained about secondhand smoke because nobody knew it was dangerous. You could light up on a bus, in a taxi, in a lift. Parents smoked in the car with the windows up and the kids in the back seat. It wasn't considered harmful, it was just normal. The shift started in the 1,980 seconds and picked up pace in the 90 seconds and 2000s. Smoking bans came in for public transport, then workplaces, then restaurants and pubs. Now, you can't smoke within 4 meters of a public building entrance in most states, and smoking in a car with kids present is illegal. Do you remember when planes had smoking sections, or when your doctor smoked during your appointment? Light up in the wrong place now, and you're facing fines. But for decades, smoke was just part of the air Australians breathed. Number 6. Letting your kids ride in the back of a ute. On weekends, especially in rural areas, you'd see families driving down the road with kids sitting in the back of the ute. Standing up, sitting on the edge, holding onto the sides as the wind whipped through their hair. It was fun, it was freedom, and it was completely legal. Farmers did it all the time, loading up the kids and driving around the property or into town. Even in the suburbs, if you had a ute and needed to move the family, the back tray was fair game. Nobody wore helmets, nobody worried about falling out, and nobody questioned whether it was safe. These days, it's illegal in most Australian states to have unrestrained passengers in the back of a ute, especially children. Do it now, and you're risking serious fines, demerit points, and charges of reckless endangerment. But for a generation of Australian kids, riding in the back of the ute was one of the great joys of childhood. Number 7. Burning off rubbish in your backyard. Every Australian household had a spot out the back where they burned their rubbish. Paper, cardboard, food scraps, old clothes, garden waste, it all went into a drum or a pile and got set alight. The smell of burning rubbish was part of the weekend, drifting over fences and mixing with the smell of backyard barbecues. It was how you dealt with waste, and nobody thought anything of it. There were no wheelie bins, no council collections, no recycling programs. You burned what you could and buried the rest. By the 1,980 seconds and 90 seconds, as environmental awareness grew and air quality became a concern, burning off was gradually banned in most urban and suburban areas. These days, lighting a fire in your backyard without a permit can result in fines, and if it gets out of control or creates too much smoke, you could face charges. But for decades, the backyard burn-off was as Australian as the Hills hoist, and the sight of smoke rising from every second yard was completely normal. Number 8. Drink driving within reason. For decades, having a few beers and then driving home was just part of Australian culture. You'd go to the pub, have 3 or 4 schooners, chat with your mates, then get in the car and drive home. As long as you weren't falling down drunk, nobody cared. There were no breathalyzers, no random breath testing, and no legal limit to worry about. It was understood that a real man could handle his drink and still drive safely. The first drink driving laws came in during the 1,960 seconds, but enforcement was minimal. Random breath testing didn't start until 1,976 inches Victoria, and even then, it took years to become widespread. These days, the laws are strict and the penalties severe. Drive over the limit, even slightly, and you're looking at fines, loss of license, and potentially jail time. The attitude has shifted completely. Drink driving is now seen as dangerous, selfish, and unacceptable. But for generations of Australians, it was just what you did on a Friday night. Number 9. Smacking someone else's kid. In the 1,950 seconds, 60 seconds, and even into the 70 seconds, discipline wasn't just your parents' job, it was communal. If you misbehaved at a neighbour's house, that neighbour had full authority to give you a smack and send you home. If you caused trouble at the local shop, the shopkeeper might give you a clip around the ear. And when you got home, your parents would thank them for it. There was an understanding that adults were collectively responsible for keeping kids in line, and physical discipline was an accepted part of that. Nobody called the police, nobody sued, and nobody questioned it. These days, laying a hand on someone else's child, even lightly, could see you charged with assault. The laws around corporal punishment have changed dramatically, and what was once considered responsible community parenting is now a criminal offence. Did you ever get disciplined by a neighbour or teacher, and did your parents back them up? It's a completely different world, and whether that's better or worse depends on who you ask. But the fact remains, what was once normal is now illegal. Number 10. Driving without a seatbelt. Believe it or not, there was a time when seatbelts were optional, and then for years after they were installed, wearing them wasn't required by law. You'd pile into the car, kids bouncing around in the back seat, standing up, leaning out the window, moving from side to side, and nobody thought twice about it. The front bench seat meant 3 people could squeeze in up front, and on long trips, kids would stretch out in the back or even sleep on the parcel shelf under the rear window. It wasn't recklessness, it was just how things were done. Seatbelt laws came in gradually during the 1,970 seconds, starting with Victoria in 1970. And suddenly, something that had always been a choice became mandatory. These days, not wearing a seatbelt will get you a hefty fine, and driving with unrestrained passengers, especially kids, can lead to serious charges. Back then, the car was just transport. Now, it's a regulated safety zone, and the freedom of bouncing around the back seat is a memory from a more carefree time. So there you have it, 10 things that used to be perfectly legal in Australia and would now land you in serious trouble. They weren't done out of malice or ignorance. They were just part of life in a different time. Society evolves, laws change, and what was acceptable yesterday becomes unthinkable today. Some of these changes have made Australia safer, fairer, and more compassionate. Others are more controversial, and people still debate whether we've gone too far or not far enough. But one thing's certain, the Australia of today operates under a completely different set of rules than the Australia of 50 or 60 years ago. And the things our parents and grandparents did without thinking twice would shock us now. Which of these surprised you the most? And do you think all these changes have been for the better? This was Retro Australia, where the past is still alive.